I'd like to call the meeting to order at 5:37 here at the district office. It is November 7th, 2013. May I have a motion to enter executive session to discuss confidential matters pertaining to the future employment of a particular person or persons, and matters pertaining to collective bargaining?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? We are now in executive session. All right, can I have a motion to exit public participation, please?
So moved.
Second.
Huh? Exec session, sorry, exec session, sorry. We have a second? We had a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, I gotta get my head on straight here. Okay, so let me get this back in order. Okay, can we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
And we'll do the moment of silence right after the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to have a slight change at this time. I'd like to, are you going to read that? Or?
No, I don't
No,
go
okay.
read the whole thing through either.
Recently, a well-beloved coach passed away, and at this time, I'd like to have a moment of silence for Dwayne Davis. All right, thank you very much. Okay, I don't believe we have any announcements for modifying the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carry. And now we're at Pride.
Okay, well, we have a formal Pride this evening, but before we do that, I do have a couple of things to mention. Congratulations to a member of our staff, our art staff, Cynthia Petrovitz, who completed a marathon this past weekend. We hit a milestone on our Facebook page. It was actually a couple weeks ago, 500 people. We had a beautiful ceremony at FDR High School for the Rocking Reading Garden. Two of our students are in a Girl Scout troop, and for their silver project, they redid the courtyard garden up at FDR. And speaking of memorials, one of the things they did, all the memorial plaques that had been worn off and you couldn't see who they were in memory of, they replaced all of those. They did a beautiful job. They got some of the local businesses to donate benches, so there was a wonderful ribbon cutting ceremony for them. Also, one of our teachers at Haviland Middle School was honored by Light FM, 92.1 Light FM. The Joe Daly Show, there was a wonderful assembly
Teacher of the Month.
for Teacher of the Month, Corey Van Zandt. A number of us were able to attend Haviland Middle School, and Eric, principal, did a phenomenal job. The jazz band played Respect, Aretha Franklin's Respect, as everybody was coming in, and Joe Daly did comment that in all the assemblies that he's ever done, at school buildings, this was the only time there was a live jazz band, and he really
You did like that, yeah.
commended us for the presentation. I just want to commend the girls volleyball team for making it to sectionals and all their hard work. They did a tremendous job. and just getting that far as a team was great. I'd also like to commend the Hyde Park Teachers Association and the Visual Environment. We have some reps here today. There was a ribbon cutting ceremony, I believe it was Monday, the corner of St. Andrews and 9G. The garden there has been completely overhauled. It looks beautiful. Again, it was a collaboration with the Visual Environment, the Hyde Park Teachers Association, and Adams Fairacre Farms, who donated a significant number of the plants. So I don't know if anybody has anything else before we go into formal Pride.
I'm not sure we mentioned it, but in addition to the girls' volleyball team making it to the sectional finals, the boys' football team made it to the sectional semifinals. They lost to a team that they previously had lost to in overtime. This time they lost by 1 touchdown, but an amazing showing for the team. And the thing probably I noticed differently is that the team has continued to grow over the last 3 years and has finally gotten to the size of a representative program for a competitive football team in terms of the number of participants and the kids available to make substitutions. And it's amazing how they can make the substitutes. You know, if anybody's followed the program over the last 10 years, you had maybe 16 kids who were playing football, half of them both ways. And, you know, by the end of the day, you know, if you had an ambulance available, you could have carried them from the field to the locker room to revive them. But it's just that kind of effort and stress on them. But they had a great job again this year. And it's a class program. It really is. You watch them on the field. You watch what goes on. They're a class group, and that's I'm convinced, just totally representative of the coaching staff has been put together and what they do with those kids.
Yeah,
Good.
thanks, Dan.
Okay, I also wanted to just thank Cora. For years, we've been looking at the artwork that gets put on the walls of our students, and it was always falling down. And Cora said one day, let's do something so that when we hang the artwork in this room, it stays up. So we have a beautiful display of student artwork, as we always do, but this time it will stay on the walls and not always look like it's falling down. So thanks, Cora.
Yep.
Okay, and as part of our formal Pride, we'd like to recognize some of our community members who just put forth extraordinary efforts to help us realize the athletic facility and also to make the celebration and the ribbon cutting a spectacular event. It's hard to recognize and thank everyone because the community certainly pulled together, and we would like to, it would be great if we could recognize, you know, many, many more people, but we really said that there were some people whose extraordinary efforts really rose to the top, and we wanted to recognize them and thank them and commemorate their leadership and their volunteerism. And the people being called up today to be recognized represent people from the football and cheer booster clubs. They were responsible for getting most of the vendors who donated food and certainly knocked themselves out day and night to make this a reality. We have a representative from the Facility Steering Forum, Bobby, who's been a stalwart at that Facility Steering Forum for many years. We have some people from our athletic department that way above and beyond their positions, they just give 24/7 to our athletic program. And we have Keep Hyde Park on Track, who certainly mobilized the community when we went back out for the vote, as well as mobilizing the homecoming event itself to make it super spectacular. So in order to recognize what really happened in this community and at least single out a few people who pretty much put their lives on hold to make sure that this event and this facility happened, we would like to recognize them and give them a Leadership and Community Service Award. And so it will have it says Leadership and Community Service Award presented to person's name, and then FDR Athletics Stadium ribbon cutting ceremony on September 27th. So, yeah, you can hold it up, and hopefully we'll get a shot of everybody up here holding it up. We do have a few people who could not make it tonight, but so these are in alphabetical order, but we'd like to call up Beth Ackerman. I know that Beth gave up at least 2 months out of her life to call college students and remind them of their civil duty to vote. So Denise Berry, also a mover and shaker. You know, it's not surprising that these faces are known to us, because they really are movers and shakers, and they got behind this with everything they had. Janet Duffy. I understand Janet can't be here this evening due to a last minute helping out her family, but we will be sure that Janet gets her plaque. Bobby Goodman. Myrna Haskell, who is also, you know, again, noteworthy, but not able to be here. She did email, so congratulations, Myrna. Yeah. Sarah Hoger, president of Keep Hyde Park on Track. I know that one. And Mark Lasan. Our football booster club. Pat Mosier. Pat Mosier needs no introduction if you've ever stepped foot in Hyde Park and had anything to do with athletics, but we'll be sure to get it to him. Margaret Catani. I know I saw Margaret come in. And Monica Rallier. That flash mob dance came from someone's brainstorm. And Mike Zagorski. Thank you, Mike. And Mike, I will make it to Darby's for those, is it wings or? Dinner. Dinner, okay. Oh, no, not that one, the Thursday night thing. The regular thing. Oh, that one. So. Oh, okay. Great. So again, hold your plaques up high for the camera. You know. Yeah, get it on Facebook too. So again, you know, really thank you on behalf of the students, both now and all the future generations. We really want to thank you so much for all of your hard work. It truly paid off. It was from start to finish, getting the athletic facility to the event itself. The ribbon cutting event was surpassed, I think, I know, all my wildest dreams. So congratulations for an unbelievable job.
Okay. Let's see if we can. You have anything else on report?
On Pride, no. On Superintendent's report?
Yeah.
One thing.
Okay.
So we're going to move from Pride to Superintendent's report?
Hmm?
Okay, we're going to move from Pride to Superintendent's report. Okay, I
Yeah.
just had one thing under Superintendent's report. we handed out this book on Board Appreciation Week, Mindset, and so I did start reading it. If any of the board members want to join me, and then maybe we can get a little Google document. Part of this is to model our literacy initiatives and talk about books as an educational organization. This is one of the #1 selling books in educational circles and certainly other circles. My background as an English teacher certainly resulted in a love of literature, and I do have to push myself sometimes to read some nonfiction, so I'm modeling going outside of what I typically do. I read a lot of nonfiction for work, but this one's very different. Basically, the book is about the two meanings of change: the ability to change, whether you're fixed and not changeable, or whether you are adept at changing. And it talks about stretching yourself and learning something new. And so, just as a book share, for me, a stretch and something new was putting a Facebook page for the district. I wasn't a Facebook person myself. I have a Facebook page. I don't use it very much. It was kind of going out on a limb to take the district into social media. And so, just as a thing where I put that on my list for probably a year and a half as a goal, and just kept it on there until I accomplished it and really stretched myself. The other tie-in connection here is the board this year did SMART goals, and much of this book talks about the process of goal setting and the effectiveness. So at our next meeting, I'll just say maybe one other word. Maybe we'll put up a document.
Okay, I just have to comment, since I have a degree in psychology that I never used. However, that you realize that it takes 3 psychologists to change a light bulb, but the light bulb's got to really want to change. Oh, yes, I. Okay, enough of that.
Okay.
Enough of that. Okay, so we are going to now get an update on the North Park climate issues.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask our Director of Facilities, Elliot Garcia, to come up to the podium. We did an air quality test at North Park. It was determined that we wanted to take it the next step and, have some further testing done, and we are committed to being transparent and open about what our process is, what we're doing, and what the results are. So even though the agenda was already set last Friday, that happened to be the day the report did come in. So instead of waiting till December, we did modify the board agenda since the report came in and we had time to modify it. We don't like to modify agendas too much, but we did. And so I'll ask Elliot to come and talk about the results from our recent testing. And I certainly know a lot more about this. I'm no expert, not even close, but I've spent a lot of time looking at it as well. So.
Indeed, we all have.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. These test results were walked into my office probably close to 5 o'clock on Friday, so it did come in very last minute, and we appreciate the allowance to add it as a last-minute agenda item because it is important to get the word out to our community as to what the condition of our school is. So I'm going to touch on a couple of points as far as what was done, how it was done. There were some concerns about the condition of the air after we did all of our physical testing. Just to recap on what happened over the summer and in September, we took some preliminary air samples to see what the quality of the air was in general and if it was conducive to mold growth or mold conditions. We also took physical samples of what was suspected to be mold, and we did come back with some limited quantities which we were able to remediate rather quickly. So the concern afterwards was, okay, well, now that you've cleaned it up and we don't see it, how do we know it's still not floating around in the air or somewhere else in the building? And so what we did was we consulted with our testing agencies. We took aerosol cassette air samples, which were put in all the rooms where we had a positive physical test result. So if we found it physically in the room, we put a cassette in to trap the air and make sure that nothing is still ambient or still growing. Now, again, most of the common types of mold that we found are existing in nature, and they are existing in some of our buildings. The concern are the quantities within typical or generally acceptable levels. And so our test results came back Friday. We, excuse me. The samples were taken on October 30th. The test results came back to us late on the 1st, and all results show concentrations deemed to be in typical or moderate ranges for an indoor building of this type. When I say indoor building of this type, we don't have central air conditioning. We are a school building of this type of construction, and all of the individual samples that came back show that they were towards the lower end of what's in acceptable range. So that's all very positive for us. Of all of the different types of mold, we had about 4 or 5 in total found. 4 out of the 5 were in very limited quantities, and the one that was towards the higher end of what we found is actually just about or under 50% of what's acceptable in an indoor environment. So at this point, we're rather confident with what we found. We have, moving forward, reached out to the testing labs for a little bit more of an in-depth analysis. You know, the numbers are the numbers, and they give you an explanation, but we do want to have direct dialogue with the testing labs to make sure that we're doing all the right things to prevent this going forward. The largest consideration in a mold condition is moisture in the air. We do continue to monitor for moisture with data loggers. We have deployed dehumidifiers, which have stayed in the building since the summertime. And I've also reached out to colleagues throughout the county and throughout the state just to make sure that if anybody's ever encountered this before, there's not something that we missed that we could be doing to make the building even safer. So right now, everything is well within reason, well within range. Nothing egregious came back on the test results, and we're going to continue to monitor air conditions overall, as well as consult with experts to make sure that we didn't miss anything in the analysis. Any questions?
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Elliot? Thank you, Elliot.
And it was important just to distinguish in the lab report that the one area that had the moderate versus the typical was the lobby. The classrooms were in better shape.
Yeah, that is correct. The one area of the building, we took, again, just to explain, we had 4 rooms sampled from the physical samples. Those 4 rooms, we repeated the air samples. We also took control samples in the lobby space for a general public area and the outdoor space. The lobby samples were taken at 3:30 in the afternoon after everybody had come and gone. The doors had been open and closed, and those numbers were just a little bit higher. But again, only for spores that are typically related to decaying or parasitic plant life. So things that are typically found in nature and not harmful to people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot.
Thank you.
Who's doing the district leadership team update?
Oh, that's me. Is that next?
Yep.
I thought it was coming for. Turn the page already. Yeah, just a very brief update. The district leadership team had its first meeting. We had 15 people in attendance. Of the 15, 5 were true non-employees. So we were happy to see people come out. There were a couple of people who aren't full-time employees, but, intermittent employees, but 5 true non-employees. We talked about the purpose for reinstating the district leadership team. We discussed the partnership with K-12 Insight and the whole goal to improve communication, increase parental involvement, and foster transparency. Our next meeting is November 14th at 6 o'clock. The agenda items are, we're going to discuss and share our status of our focus schools, and we're going to begin the process of updating our plan for shared decision-making. One of the things that will air between now and our December board meeting will be a link on our website called Reach Out to RICHEC, and people will be able to instantly, there'll be a video of myself explaining the process and explaining what it is we're trying to do in moving forward and in our improvement efforts, and then people can click the link below and instantly share their ideas. So that's just one piece of what the enhancements that we'll see as a result of our partnership with K-12 Insight. I did film my video in my office, but I'm going to let the students do this at FDR. So I made an appointment to have FDR Live do it. They certainly will do a better job of filming, and I certainly will appreciate the teleprompter, even though I did mostly memorize. But between now and December, we will have that link up on the website, and we'll be sharing that process at the next district leadership team on November 14th.
All right, thank you. At this time, we're going to have a Common Core implementation presentation by Cora. And Cora, I think this is important enough not to be constrained by 10 minutes. So if it takes longer, that's fine. I'm not going to yell at you.
Okay.
All right?
Well, thank you for that. Let's see, I'm looking for my trusty clicker. Okay, let's see if we're on here. Okay, Wayne, I'm going to ask for your tech assistance. So this evening, I'm going to share a little bit of information about, thank you, about the way in which the Common Core is being implemented in Hyde Park. And I recognize that this has been a fairly controversial and somewhat emotional topic. All the more reason, I think, for us to take the time, and I do appreciate the extension of the 10-minute limit, to really talk about those aspects of it over which we do have some control, recognizing that to a large degree we are limited in our influence and control over this. One of the things that has been, I think, very confusing for people is that there are the Common Core Learning Standards, which have been adopted by most states in the country. So this is as close to national standards as I think we'll see in our lifetime. We have a new assessment program that is seeking to be aligned with the Common Core. And we have a new APPR, or teacher evaluation system. All of those have been happening simultaneously, and you might think about it in terms of a perfect storm. So while each of those things may have their individual merits, and we can all talk about what those might be, the fact that they've all been sort of lumped together in the minds of many has made it very difficult to really focus on what those potential benefits of any one of them might be. I wanted to share a little bit of data with you because as we talk about the reform agenda and we talk about Common Core, the phrase college and career, or career and college readiness, comes out over and over and over again. And the Common Core, in part, came about as a result of looking at research on graduation rates across the country, income levels of students who have graduated and achieved different levels of higher education, quality of life indicators, and in particular in New York State, concern about students who are leaving our high schools having passed the required number of regions with a passing score, and for years it's been 65, and then entering colleges and finding themselves in need of remediation at a significant cost to those students and their families. So on the slide that you see here, you can take a look at data that really speaks to the relationship between unemployment and education, and annual earnings and education. And if you start at the bottom and take a look at students who have less than a high school diploma, you'll see that 12.4% of students or individuals who fall within that category were unemployed in 2012. And the group that we're talking about here is students, or adults rather, who are 25 or older. So we're not talking about the 19-year-old dropout. We're talking about someone who is 25 or older, and we're talking about students who did not achieve a high school diploma. And as you work your way up to the top of the chart, you see that unemployment rates go from 12.4 for those 25-year-olds and older who did not have a high school diploma, down to 2.1% for people who have a professional degree. That top bar would be your physicians, for example. On the right, it shows the relationship between those same levels of education and median income. And while we can certainly identify that the reason for quality education is not all about money, there are quality of life indicators that go along with income. Things like access to good health care, access to further education, access to the purchase of a home. The purchase of a home is an unusual indicator because it has been linked to student performance. And I can share that at another time if you like. But I shared this with you simply because, in part, it represents some of the research and some of the sense of urgency around ensuring that our students do graduate prepared to have those options of being in college or being in career and training programs and ready to perform at high levels. The other piece of data that you see here is indicative of graduation in New York State. So across New York State, and again, this is 2012 graduation data, the average graduation rate was 74% across the state for all students. So that's inclusive of our students in general education, our students receiving special education services, et cetera. And on the left-hand side of the chart, you can see the way that's broken out. So while the overall rate was 74, when that's broken out, you can see that for some of the groups about which we have concern in Hyde Park, the percentages are much lower. And I do want to give you our own data in just a moment. On the right, you'll see that there's a reference to college and career ready. You've heard me a couple of times talk about a change in expectations from the State Education Department regarding student performance on the Regents exams. And I mentioned a moment ago that the research has told us that if students achieve a 65 or higher on the Regents exams and go on to school, large numbers of those students are needing remediation. So a couple of years ago, the state started identifying what they refer to as aspirational goals. So rather than having students be satisfied, although they're still passing, with a 65 in the English Regents exam, the aspirational goal now is 75. And in math, although again 65 is passing, the aspirational goal is 80 on those Regents exams for those students to be able to enter school at a higher level as freshmen and be prepared to take college level courses. So as you can see on the right, there's an indication that of all the students who graduated in 2012, only 35% of them overall were meeting those aspirational goals. And when you look at students who are our English language learners, our students with disabilities, that percentage is dramatically lower. So that's some of the data and the research that's behind the implementation and the focus on the Common Core standards themselves. So what we're talking about with Common Core is definitely a shift in expectations, and in order to have any expectation that students can meet those standards, we need to change our instructional practice. So the standards themselves are not the curriculum. They are a set of expectations at each grade level. They do provide clear goals for student learning that assist teachers in ensuring that students are being presented with the skills and knowledge that they need. They are robust. You'll hear a lot of reference to rigor and making sure that the texts that we're presenting to students are of high rigor and high complexity levels, and that we're making meaningful use of lessons for students so that there are connections made to the real world. And in particular, you'll hear many, many references to the 6 shifts. And now in some circles, they're talking about reducing the number of those, but the language is still the same. And I've given you a slide here to highlight what those are. And in literacy, what we're talking about is a balance between informational and literary texts. And very often, especially at the elementary level, for many, many years, our focus was on fiction. Students read, certainly in science and social studies, nonfiction materials, but there was a sense that the greatest emphasis was on fiction. And the Common Core is saying to us, we need to integrate literature across all content areas. We need to have a balance of about 50% of fiction and nonfiction in classrooms. And Hyde Park has taken that very seriously over the last few years. The board's been very supportive through the budget process of allowing us to purchase additional materials in order to address that. The staircase of complexity really speaks to the different levels at which students are presented with increasingly complex tasks. And one of the things that we talk about is having students be engaged in text materials that are at their instructional levels when they're in a reading group and they're working with their classroom teacher. But that when the teacher is having a whole group discussion about a text, that it be a little bit higher than their instructional level. And the theory there is that students are able to think about, and in particular discuss with peers, with the support of a teacher, material that's at a higher level of complexity than they can actually read independently. So that, in part, is what we're working toward. Text-based answers refers to that expectation that rather than a student saying, you know, I know the answer, and simply giving it and having the teacher move on, the teacher says to that student, how do you know? Show me in the text. And it's as specific as, you know, tell us what page you're on, what paragraph are you looking at, where in the text does it suggest that these were the causes of the Civil War, for example. So we're not relying just on outside information, relying on a student being able to go right to the text and use what's in there to either defend an argument, justify an opinion, provide a reason for a response. Certainly, we've been working on increasing writing across the curriculum for a number of years, and that too is very clearly outlined in the Common Core. And that use of academic vocabulary. In the Common Core, you'll see a reference to 3 tiers of vocabulary. Tier 1 is just conversational language that we use in a social way with each other. Tier 3 is very content specific. So what's the vocabulary that you need to have and be able to use to be successful in a high school calculus course? And then tier 2 are those words that are not discipline specific, but are very important for students to know and be able to use. Words like evaluate, judge, defend. And those, as you think about it, can be applied to any discipline. So those are the shifts in ELA, and there's reference in the Common Core to those ideas and those expectations being applied across disciplines. So in the technology classroom, in the art classroom, in the music classroom, what do those things look like and how are they applied? In math, it's really about focus, and for many of us, this is not news. We've been hearing for many, many years that we need to teach fewer concepts and we need to go deep. In the United States, we've been very, very broad and we move very, very quickly, and our counterparts in many parts of the world can spend days and days and days on a single math problem. And so the shift in focus is really on bigger ideas, digging more deeply, really applying critical thinking and ensuring understanding before we ask students to move on. Fluency is certainly also a balance. It's that emphasis on both students being able to very easily at a certain point rattle off those math facts. We want them to be able to do that, but we also want them to truly understand what it is that they're doing. What do we mean when we say we're going to multiply or we're going to divide? What does that really mean? The application is really, again, about real-world problem solving and being able to recognize that a skill or a task that they've learned in math can be applied in an unfamiliar setting like the science lab. So really taking away that idea of discrete skills and discrete knowledge and recognizing connections and patterns and real-world application. So what does all of that look like here? The first thing is that it's required a great deal of professional development for our staff. And I went back just over the last couple of years and looked at all of the professional development sessions, department meetings, study groups, conferences, and added up as best I could a fairly conservative estimate of the time. And so 500 hours of professional development is about right, but I did not multiply that by the number of people involved. So that's 500 hours of discrete activities times, how many, probably a couple of hundred overall people involved in all of those. So there has been quite a bit of professional development. And that's included both awareness level, like what is this thing called Common Core, and skill development, which is how do I do it in my classroom, for teachers and for our administrators. As I mentioned, department meetings, grade level meetings, all of those opportunities for people to come together, look at their practice, look at lessons, and talk about where they're seeing evidence of the Common Core. We've done training on writing across disciplines. Our collaboration with BARD is growing and has been very important in terms of influencing some of our teachers' thinking about how to create lessons that are aligned to the Common Core. Brian Green is a consultant that started working with us last summer on the ELA component of Common Core, and we have an ongoing plan to work with him. We had teachers this past summer and administrators attend sessions at Teachers College at Columbia University. And within our administrative retreat, both looking at our day-to-day work and really thinking about administrative goals, all of that has been connected to the Common Core as well. So that's just the professional development, and it is ongoing. Our curriculum has needed to be revised, and again, the Common Core is not the curriculum. Those are the standards. We had standards before we had Common Core, and now we've needed to revise some of our curriculum so that it matches and is aligned. And this is just a list of the projects that have either been completed or are going to be completed. At the bottom where you see the use of the SED or State Education Department curriculum modules, that's new this fall in both ELA and math. As part of the support that the State Ed Department is offering, there are modules, which are basically units and lessons that are available to districts. And some districts have mandated all of them. Some districts have mandated none of them. In my work with the directors and the K-12 team, we've taken a look at many of the modules that are there and have made some deliberate decisions about which we're requiring and which we're asking people to dapple with a little bit, and which we've said you don't need to take a look at that one yet. And the criteria that we've used have really been things like, how do these modules support our introduction of the Common Core to our students as well as to our teachers? How do they complement our existing curriculum? And where might there be some modules that we want to let someone else field test because they don't quite match our sense of rigor and appropriateness for our students? At the K-5 level, our ongoing work with balanced literacy continues. And all of that work, the work we've done with the continuum of literacy learning, our use of Fontes and Pinnell assessments, that work is already very closely aligned with the Common Core. In terms of supporting our parents, because we know that this has been very confusing and sometimes downright frustrating for parents, we have done a few things, and we plan to do more. Last year, we provided both an ELA night and a math night in Common Core. We had very good attendance at the math night, a little less at ELA. Violet Avenue School did a Common Core night that was extremely well attended. I was there. Every classroom was standing room only. We had a great collaboration with the PTA there and with Marist College. Our Marist students provided childcare, and some of our high school students supported that. PTA and Title I funds provided dinner for families, And then teachers in every classroom presented information on what the new test items might look like, strategies for parents to support their students at home. And it was really an exemplar and something we'd like to see replicated in each building. We are implementing a new elementary report card this year. We worked with our strategic planning subcommittee to create a guide to explain the new report card, and in it there are explanations of the Common Core. That was distributed in the fall during Meet the Staff Night and will also be shared again as parents do their first conference coming up this month. We also have an evening scheduled on Tuesday of next week at 5:30 in this room. Our directors of humanities and math and science and I will be here to do another presentation on Common Core.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just to interject too, what's interesting about that night is it was specifically planned to have it prior to PTA meetings so that if parents were going to PTA meetings, it wasn't two separate nights.
Right.
And one last thing, we can also update this slide because North Park had a Common Core night this fall. So.
There we go. I will add that to my slide. And then we're going to wait for questions from the board. 5 o'clock. Oh, 5 o'clock. Yes, thank you. 5 to 6:30. Did I say 5:30? Thank you. Yes, it's 5 to 6:30 in this room so that parents have half an hour to leave here and get to their PTA meetings. Thank you for that correction. I appreciate it. So as we move forward, we recognize there's still a great deal of work to do. We will continue to work on the curriculum updates and new assessments. We will continue professional development. Analyzing the curriculum that we have modified needs to occur so that we can continue to really ensure that that rigor and alignment is there. We'll continue to identify ways to support our parents. There is accountability for teachers through walkthroughs and the evaluation process. And I can share with you an example. In the last 2 weeks, I've done walkthroughs in almost every building using a tool from the Engage New York website. And it's basically an evidence gathering tool. And since Mr. Shaw is here, I'll mention that he and I did walkthroughs just this week. And the process is basically that we both went into 4 or 5 different classrooms at the same time. We had our evidence collection guide, and it basically pinpoints things that we should be looking for in classrooms. Are students engaged in different levels of text? Are students engaged in writing that requires higher order thinking skills? Is there complexity? Is there differentiation happening? And at the end of those observations, Eric and I sat down in his office and went through all of the different things that we saw that we could connect. And we've made a commitment as an administrative team that when I'm in the building, and I'm in every building twice a month, that's what we will do. We will do walkthroughs using those evidence guides. We sit down and process it. The principals save those documents so that over time we can begin to see patterns. Teachers do receive feedback from the principals as a result of both walkthroughs and our evaluations. Our administrators started around the middle of September, end of September in some cases, doing the formal evaluations of teachers. And in those, there are very specific references to whether or not a lesson plan reflected the Common Core, whether the strategies that we heard and the questioning that we heard were reflective of the kinds of things we would expect. So there is accountability connected there. And then, obviously, for our administrators to do that work, their own development needs to continue. In our K-12 administrators meetings every month, we do activities around our own inter-rater reliability relative to the teacher evaluation system. We look at videos of teachers, and we'll be looking at the evidence guide and talking about what we're seeing. Does that look like rigor to you? How do we know? What feedback would we give the teachers? So all of that will continue, and you will hear more about that as we go. And from there, I'll ask if you have questions.
Cora, thank you very much.
Welcome.
It occurred to me that if you were opening for Dr. King and his town hall meetings, perhaps they'd go a whole lot smoother than they've gone during the thing. So that's very good information. Does anybody
Thank
have any
you.
questions?
I have a few. Cora, when you talk about, back when you talked about the success rates of various classes of students, one group that not concerns me, but I think needs to be dealt with differently, I just want to confirm that, the English language learners.
Yeah.
That's a group of students that come in at any grade level, from kindergarten through 12th grade, with a significant lacking of understanding of the English language. Now, they take special courses or engage in special additional help to bridge that gap so that they get to a point where they test out. Now, this number that says 34.3% graduate and 7.3% are ready for college, are those the ones that are being looked at, the ones that still have an English language learning need at graduation?
I don't know. I can find that out. And again, the 7.3 is the percent of students who met those aspirational goals. So a 75 on the English regents, an 80 on the math regents. And those are the two assessments that they're using as indicators of that college and career readiness. But that's a great question, Dan. I'll find out if that's students who were ever receiving ESL services or students who were identified as English language learners at the time of graduation. I think that's your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
quite.
I will find that out.
Uh,
And just to clarify again for everyone, this is New York State data.
Right.
This is not specific to Hyde Park.
Actually, I have several questions. The second one, when we talked about using the writing and pointing to where facts are listed and stuff like that, are the students required to vet the knowledge or expertise of the people that wrote the books, or are they accepting the facts that they are speaking with great knowledge because of the books being presented by the school district?
Another good question. I would say that at the elementary level, especially when we're using, actually this is probably true K-12, when we're using textbooks that the board has adopted and are 50% or more of the curriculum, there's probably not a tremendous emphasis on evaluating the source. Anytime students are using information that they've found on a website or on the internet, it's a very different conversation. And starting as early as upper elementary, students are taught, and the conversation is had around how do you know this is a good source. The most deliberate instruction around that happens at the middle and high school, but we do start even at upper elementary talking about just because you found it on the web doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's good. There's much less of that when we're talking about a textbook, however.
Right. And the reason I brought this question was something I had, but I probably wouldn't have asked it, except I came across a article on the internet today, actually, of a letter that was sent to President Obama, signed by some 50 children's book writers and illustrators, and the chief signature was
Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou, who I think we all recognize. I mean, she's had readings, I believe, at presidential inaugurations and stuff like
Yes.
that. Questioning the fact that they feel the shift is creating an issue with our students. And, you know, it's going to be, I think it's going to be an ongoing problem for a while with us trying to decide who's right, who's wrong, and where is the right grounds to fall on. And I've heard very little conversation, really. You know, we had this, we did this, some indicators indicated we weren't doing as well as we want, and suddenly we have this over here. You know, we went from here to here, there's no mid-ground, there's no discussion, there's no progression. The things that we've always done seem to have, you know, come out of a clear blue sky, and, you know, people are seriously questioning whether or not, you know, some people with good intentions and lots of money have really hijacked the entire education of this country by going off on their own and investing millions and millions of dollars in this to, not millions, I guess it's hundreds of millions of dollars in development. It's like the Gates that are doing this. So, you know,
Yeah.
that's a concern I've got.
Well, if I can just comment on that, one of the things that we've talked about and that I've observed is that when you look at the Common Core and even when you look at the 6 shifts, it talks about balance. And the expectation at elementary, for example, is really 50-50, that students should not be discarding good quality literature and fiction, that they should be getting both on a regular basis. And I did an observation of a first grade teacher this week, and the first thing that I saw when she began her math lesson was that students were on the carpet. She introduced a fictional book called 10-something Fireflies. It's about fireflies. Nonfiction text. But the book itself had beautiful, rich illustrations. It was about a little group of children capturing fireflies and putting them in the jar like we all did when we were little. Some of us still do as adults. So here was this beautiful, rich, colorful text that was fiction used as the introduction to a math lesson on counting more than 2 numbers at a time. So what I'm seeing is teachers, with the support of their administrators and the support of the purchase of materials, finding ways to marry the two. I'm still seeing lots of good, rich literature in middle and high school English courses. So I think people are certainly tempted, perhaps, to swing too far the other side in terms of nonfiction if it's really been absent in their schools and in the curriculum. But the core itself says balance in all things. So I think it's really just up to us to help teachers be reassured that that is what we're asking for, and that we still highly value all of that literature.
Well, you're doing well, because this is the second assurance of that I've gotten in the same day. I also talked to my
good.
daughter, who is, but people may not, is an ELI teacher in the district, and we were also talking about the literature and how she uses it. And I was very, very surprised that she goes all the way back to fairy tales.
Yeah.
She uses all forms of fairy tales, and she takes advantage, and it's an interesting concept because of the ELA, and I'm assuming it's presented a benefit for classes where we mix the students of different skill levels and stuff like that, where she discusses classic fairy tales that exist in different cultures that are similar but not the same. Cinderella
Right.
apparently exists in many, many different cultures in
Oh,
different
yeah.
forms with different nuances and changes, and they discuss that using the expertise of the students in the classroom who have experienced it firsthand from their own country, which
Yeah.
is very interesting to me.
I actually talked to a secondary teacher, not from Hyde Park, but I can imagine our teachers doing something similar, who at the high school level uses fairy tales as an introduction to a unit on good and evil. And the conversation about, here are fairy tales, and there's always good and evil. And then here's current events. And what does good and evil look like here?
In
And-
reverse, I'd say evil and good.
Well, yeah. And, what's the relationship? What connections can we make between these fairy tales and what happens in certain parts of the world?
I got 2 quicker ones. I feel
Okay.
like I'm dominating, but in the math program, when we're talking about, we've always presented a broad-based coverage of all of it and got through. We've got it all done in the school year. We've got in the school years that we present. Is there a feeling, or has there been any indication that to follow the recommendations in the math area is going to require a more significant commitment of time in classrooms and the amount of time that they teach these subjects to go into that depth?
There's been some, and I would just caution even myself in terms of making too many conclusions yet, because we are early November. Teachers are using the new math curriculum that was written 2 summers ago to be aligned with the Common Core. They're also beginning to use the math modules from State Ed. And again, the same teacher that I observed the other day was sharing that she is using the math modules as we've asked her to do. She really needs a full hour to get that full lesson in. On Tuesday, when we had teacher training day, the teachers K-5 and the math teacher 6-8 spent a full day on math with a consultant that did a really nice job talking about how to get at all of those skills without having a 2-hour math lesson. So at elementary, for example, you know, most of our teachers do some kind of morning routine or calendar activity. And, you know, we need to dispense with some of the kind of warm, fuzzy things that we did, not to dispense with all of the community building. That's not what I'm suggesting. But there's opportunity within those morning routines to reinforce some of those skills so that when students come to the math lesson, they have maybe a greater foundation. But it is a valid point to be concerned about what our time might need to look like. Are there things that we'll need to do less of or not at all? And again, how do we strike the right balance?
And just when you talked about the curriculum development, looking at the ELA side of that coin, we've got 2 gaps in there that haven't been addressed yet. Is that correct? 6th grade and 10th grade?
Yes, 10th grade is waiting because we're still expecting guidance from state ed. So even as state ed has rolled out Common Core, they've done some things in chunks. The English and integrated algebra Regents exams will be changing, but we're a year out. So we're not rewriting grade 10 until we know what that Regents exam is going to look like. We don't want to ask teachers to do it twice. And grade 6 is on the docket. There's work that needs to be done to make a more deliberate bridge between the K-5 balanced literacy and what we do in grade 6.
The reason it just struck me at 6th grade was when I went through school, the Archdiocese of New York went through an experimental program that ran for 2 years of accelerating. You know, instead of enrichment, they accelerated students, and the target grade at the elementary level was grade 6. I entered grade 6 in September. I moved to grade 7 in December and graduated from grade 7 in June.
Okay.
And the feeling at that time was that 6th grade was about 70% review of what had preceded that, so that was a target idea. And then when I saw the 6th grade here, I said, I thought we changed by now, but maybe not.
Yeah, we still have some work to do.
All right, thank you, Cor.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yes. Is there a link between Common Core and standardized testing?
Absolutely. So in New York State, we've had our 3 through 8 ELA and math assessments and our Regents exams for years and years. Now that the state has adopted Common Core, the assessments that we've had don't align. So last year was the first year that our students in 3 through 8 took an assessment that was aligned to the Common Core. And in my introductory remarks, I mentioned the confusion and the frustration around the way all of this has been rolled out. Some would say we're starting Common Core at the same time that we're asking students to be assessed on the Common Core. And on a different night and in a different place, we can talk about the rollout. But there's a definite relationship. So the assessments are changing so that they are more aligned with the standards. So if that's the standardized testing that you're referring to, there's an absolute link.
There seems to be a common perception that there's been an increase in standardized testing. And I'm kind of curious about whether that is in fact true and if that's related to Common Core.
Okay, so that one's a little more complex. There are still tests of English language arts and math in grades 3 through 8. That has not changed. There used to be social studies assessments at grades 5 and 8. Those have actually gone. There is still a science assessment at 4 and 8. That's not changed. So for our 3rd through 8th graders, there's actually one less test administered by the state. So remember that phrase because that's part of the complex piece. The Regents exams are not changing in number, but they are changing in content and level of rigor. There will be a little bit of an overlap. Parents of students who are in integrated algebra and English at the secondary level will see if they look at the Regents exam schedule that there are actually 2 in each of those subjects offered in June. One is a brand new Common Core assessment. The other is the traditional Regents exam. Most districts are having students take both, and the higher of those two scores is the one that will go on their transcript. The rationale is we need to give students the opportunity to take the Common Core assessment. It's a good opportunity for them to have data. It's also a good opportunity for us to assess our curriculum, integrated algebra, for instance. So in that respect, right now there are 2 exams for those 2 subjects. But as far as the state testing program, it has not increased. It's actually decreased a smidgen by the elimination of the social studies. Put that over there. Over here we have Race to the Top initiative, the reform agenda, and the new teacher evaluation system. And you'll remember that teachers are evaluated in 3 blocks, if you will. One is, and it's 60% of their overall assessment, observations that are the sort of traditional model of me going in, I observe you, you and I meet, we do a conference, I give you a written evaluation. The second block, or the next 20%, is student performance. And districts have the obligation to make some decisions about what that might look like. So when the state ed department says, we've not increased testing because you can use your other testing data to address this need, that's true for our students in 3 through 8 and those who are taking Regents exams. We have to choose from a list of standardized assessment or assessment models, something to fulfill that 20%. So in our district, for that 20%, for our students in K through 3, we're using our MAPS data, the computerized testing that our students do twice a year, to fulfill that requirement. So in that sense, there is an additional test for students because of that requirement. As a district, we made the decision to eliminate something else because we're doing MAPS. Elementary parents will remember hearing DIBELS. Students were individually assessed in reading and math using an assessment called DIBELS. Rather than have both of those happen, we've eliminated DIBELS and we're doing just MAPS. One really important reason to do that, other than it meeting the criteria for that 20%, is instructional time. Because DIBELS was an individualized assessment that took a few minutes with every student several times a year. There were many, many hours where students were working in small groups or on independent tasks, working with a teaching assistant or someone else supporting them while teachers were administering DIBELS to 25 to 30 students. The data was very helpful, and most of us would agree that we didn't make the best possible use of that information. However, something needed to go. We needed to be doing something that was on the list from state ed and met that obligation. And we chose MAPS because it has 30 years of research behind it. It's highly valuable information. The turnaround is almost immediate for teachers, and we can use that and share it with parents. The third chunk, if you will, that last 20%, also requires some connection to student performance, and it requires negotiations with the union. So the regulations permit us to do something like the following. All Haviland Middle School teachers will have this 20% of their evaluation based on ELA performance of all of our students in the building because all of us are teachers of literacy. That's an argument that many would support. And legally, we could do that in terms of the regulation. That would have to be agreed upon by both the district and the teachers' union in order for us to implement it in that fashion. In the absence of that kind of agreement, in our district, what was negotiated was the administration of a vocabulary test. A few minutes ago, I talked about tiers 1, 2, and 3, those different kinds of vocabulary. So what we have agreed to in our district is a tier 2 vocabulary assessment that every student takes. So if you think about it in those terms, our students at most levels are taking either 1 or 2 additional assessments. What I want to add about those assessments is that they are designed, especially the vocabulary assessment, to be much like a routine activity that happens in class. The vocabulary is directly linked to the curriculum and what students should be doing. So it's not the same as today is testing day, everything shuts down because we're doing this state test, and then all our teachers are going to go away for a day or two and score it. It's here's a test, much like a unit test that you would have taken. They're all multiple choice. They're all done on Scantron so that teachers aren't being pulled from classrooms to score them. That was a long answer to a hard question.
Utilized
I don't know if I got
effectively,
to
they
it.
replace what we would normally do anyway in the class.
Exactly, as opposed to being viewed as another separate high-stakes test.
So I appreciate you breaking it down in that level of detail. It was a long answer, but
Sorry.
no, I think it was necessary.
Okay.
What I gleaned from that is that there is additional testing.
Mm-hmm.
However, the additional testing is not driven by Common Core.
Absolutely not.
The additional testing is driven by APPR.
That's correct.
Or teacher evaluations if you're not in the business.
That's correct, and I appreciate that distinction being made publicly. It's an important point.
So the other thing I wanted to follow up on was the fact that we're using both MAPS and a vocabulary test in
Mm-hmm.
association with APPR, and those
Mhm.
are both tests that we can use as diagnostic tests for students, in addition to the fact that they're related to teacher evaluations.
The MAPS test certainly is helpful in terms of it being a diagnostic tool, absolutely. The vocabulary test is a mastery test. So it's not a growth measure, it's not administered twice. It's administered once in the spring. And those students will leave that course and go to a different course the following year where the vocabulary will most likely be different. So I wouldn't want people to have the impression that the vocab test is a diagnostic tool, but the MAPS absolutely is.
So the vocab test is that part of their grade?
The vocabulary test for secondary students is a grade. At elementary, many teachers, K2, it's not a grade. 3, 4, 5, I don't believe are using it as a grade either. And I'm sorry that for some reason I'm not pulling that right out of my head. But secondary is, it's a test grade like any other test grade.
Okay, so that test may or may not actually contribute to the evaluation of the students.
Secondary, yes. Elementary, no.
Yeah, so depending on
Well,
the grade level of the students, it may or may not contribute to the evaluation of the
right.
students'
I
abilities.
would just say that at the elementary level, when a third grade teacher is filling out report cards, during the term or the period, that vocabulary, they're getting information that helps them flesh out that bigger picture of
Oh,
the
sure.
student on a scale of 1 through 4. So it's not just, I'll give the students a vocabulary test and it won't affect my knowledge as a teacher of them as a learner. It
Right.
certainly will help to inform the teacher as they fill out those elementary report cards.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, another question, I hope unrelated. Are there any standardized certification or some sort of an audit that a district needs to go through in order to be shown to comply with Common Core?
Well, I can tell you, having spent the last several days writing plans and reports for state ed, that as a focus district, and by that I mean that we have 2 schools in our district, Haviland and FDR, who are focus schools, meaning we have some improving to do based on performance of some of our students. We're required by regulation to do a self-assessment. We will have a site visit from the State Ed Department, and as a result of those things, we need to write improvement plans. Those improvement plans are based on a rubric that's quite comprehensive, and it includes 6 different tenets, if you will, and some of those are directly linked to instruction and lessons and planning. Within that body of work that we're evaluated against, there are multiple references to Common Core. So as a focus district receiving that oversight and support from the State Ed Department, there is a requirement that we complete plans, that we attend to any deficiencies that we have in student performance, and the expectation is that we do that by aligning ourselves with Common Core and making the necessary revisions. The next question might be, what's the consequence around that, if we don't submit the plan? We are receiving grant funds that are connected to our identification as a focus district. So if those plans are not submitted, if they're not approved by the State Ed Department, some of that funding is in jeopardy. The more important issue is that if our students aren't demonstrating improvement and progress toward meeting the goals that we set, then the next consequence is that we may be identified as a priority district rather than a focus. That simply means even greater oversight, more scrutiny of our work, more attention and time spent here by the State Ed Department.
Okay, so the short answer is no.
Yes?
There isn't any sort of standardized certification or audit for compliance with Common Core.
Not at this time.
However, we have special oversight from the state at the moment that applies directly to how closely we are complying with Common Core.
Yes, and I would use implementing rather than clean. Again, it's a set of standards that describe what students should know and be able to do. It's not a set of regulations. So I'm not sure about the use of the word compliance with a set of standards. But I'm probably just using semantics now, so I apologize.
Tier 3 vocabulary words.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I'm not going to split hairs over that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Thank you, Cora.
You're
Very nice.
welcome.
I think, Cora, Doug should have gone a little further, maybe not only presenting the presentations for Dr. King, but maybe giving him his actual presentation also, because this I understood.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that.
Okay. Now we'll have Wayne do a little presentation on the CPI and the tax cap, and we're back to the 10-minute rule.
I promise I'll be less than 5.
No exceptions for you.
We'll hear plenty more about it as the year goes along, so.
The economy continues to stay in difficult financial condition, and what has happened is inflation continues to decrease. Something that happens when inflation decreases is that the CPI goes down as well. So we've been watching this, and we regularly report to the board about what's happening with the CPI and why is that important tonight. So you see the declining consumer price index and the tax cap, and as we move into the 14-15 budget season, we're going to have to develop our third tax cap. This is our third year doing it, so there's an interesting change, and that's the fact that inflation has been dropping at a very fast rate. So the concerns for the Hyde Park School District is within that tax cap that I get up here and speak about each year, and we've really made it a goal of both the administrators and the board to help the public understand what that means. And just a very, very summative version is it's a formula, a very complex formula that governs the amount of tax levy increase the district can do in any given year. So CPI, if you remember, as a consumer price index, is a direct component of that formula. So with that being said, the CPI factor can have an effect on what our ability to raise revenue and taxes will be for 14-15. So we're watching it real close. Back to the property tax cap law, the statute stated that a local government entity can annually increase its total property tax levy by only 2% or the CPI, whichever was lower. The formula is further adjusted by other exclusions that we've gone through, things like TRS, which is our teacher's retirement system, or employee retirement system, capital expenses, pilots, which are tax abatements from the town or the county, and other different exemptions that happen. During our first 2 years with the tax cap, the CPI has been at or above 2%. So utilizing the 2% figure was a very easy thing. Right now, the CPI is at much less than 2%, and you'll see in the next slide that it's actually at 1.66%. A little bit alarming because it does factor right into that formula. So based on the analyst's prediction for CPI, it will continue a trajectory downward. So by the time our numbers come out in the beginning of the year, we might see something less than 1.6%. And like I said, the CPI factor is announced mid to late January, sometimes as late as February. So with that being said, we have, as we get into budget season, we have some options. In any given year, under the tax cap law, we can, districts have the option to exceed the tax cap levy. We haven't had to do that in the past 2 years. But as things change in the formula, this might be something that might be a conversation at some point. But this option would require a 60% supermajority voter approval, a much different structure than the simple majority that we're used to with 50%. And the rationale for those districts that have gone through that with a supermajority, and there have been a lot that have put it out there, some that failed and some that actually passed it, is to maintain programs and give the community the chance to vote in favor for that. So moving into the future, the Hyde Park School District is going to, keep this on our radar and make sure that we're, looking at what the CPI is and helping to keep the community informed as we develop into our budget season. We'll keep this as an ongoing topic and conversation, and this information will be included in our future annual tax cap presentation along with the 14-15 budget cycle. Questions?
Thank you, Wayne. Anybody have any questions?
I do.
Okay, Gary?
Wayne, let me see if I got this. The CPI, say it does come in at the 1.6. So anything over, if we come up with a number anywhere over that 1.6%, we'd go into supermajority vote?
Well, the 1.6 is one simple component of a
Right,
large.
including those other 4 items you mentioned, but
It's very likely that we could. I mean, I don't know because I don't have the other numbers, but it's likely that our ability to raise taxes at the rate that we've been used to might be suppressed a little bit because the numerator, the denominator that we're multiplying by is less than what we've been used to.
so as compared to this current budget that we just went through, the numbers, will they, going by low CPI, would the percentage numbers, levy numbers, be that much more or close to it, depending if we keep all programs and such?
If we kept all programs and using the 1.6 versus the 2.0,
And with those other
might be
exemptions
across,
included?
right. And from what I'm hearing, and this is just, just rumor at this point in time, that there is no TRS or ERS, reduction on the tax cap this year.
Oh.
So that too, as we hear more about that, that might be an additional hardship for us if we can't utilize those numbers.
Thank you.
And we're not allowed to carry over anything that the CPI went over for 2% in the previous years?
No.
No.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you, Wayne. At this time, I'd like a motion to enter public participation, please.
So move.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? We're now in public participation. If anybody would like to address the board, please step to the mic. Let me get a piece of paper.
Good evening. I'm Lynn Schiffer. I'm here again. 3 different reasons I'm standing up here today. The first is to congratulate, unfortunately a bunch of them have left, but to congratulate all of these folks who are really deserving of the recognition they got tonight for everything they did for this community. Second reason I'm here, swim. Boys swim, been here before about it. First I want to thank the board for listening to our concerns as parents and as kids on the swim team. We know you listened, and we know that you listened to, specifically a solution to our concerns about it. The last that we heard from you is that there was going to be work towards finding transportation for our kids to make this work to Marlboro so that they could be a merged team. Well, informally, through the grapevine, I've heard there might be transportation at this point to and from practice. There might be transportation to meets. Don't know about afterwards, but we're getting nothing formal. We've heard nothing committed. We've heard nothing definite. We need to know. We need the communication. We need to know what's going on. There was a first meeting last night for the team in Marlboro. A lot of excited kids, and they met the kids they're going to be on the team with from other schools, and they are being positive, even though this isn't exactly what they were looking for. But we still do not have confirmation that the busing is going to work as it was supposed, as we last heard it was going to. We need your help to make that happen. The other reason I'm here, okay, now that I took off, see, I was swim.
I'm glad there's only 3.
Okay, now I'm soccer. I am the president of the President's Soccer Association. We are the booster club for boys soccer. As the President's Soccer Association, we have, we support from modified JV and varsity level the efforts of our boys soccer teams. I want you to know, earlier you talked about teams that have gone to sectionals. Well, the varsity soccer team, they just qualified for sectionals. They unfortunately played a top seed team. They lost, but they fought real hard. They did a great job, so they deserve that recognition too. But really what I want to talk about in terms of the soccer is this wonderful new athletic facility. And that athletic facility was sold to our kids, sold to our community, sold to the voters as an athletic facility, not as a football stadium. And what we've seen in the past couple months is, as it has opened, is a real preference towards the football stadium. And I'll tell you specifically what happened is that the senior game for the boys soccer, varsity soccer, just a couple days before that game was scheduled and a couple days after, there were football games that were absolutely announced that they were going to be held at the new athletic facility. We kept asking what was going on with the soccer game. Could that also be held at the athletic facility? It wasn't until the very last minute that we got an answer saying, no, it's not going to be. They're going to be over on Creek Road where nobody knew to go, from our community to go and support them. And the communication was really lacking. Major, point I want you to understand is the communication of why they had to have their game not at the new athletic facility and didn't know until the last minute was really lacking to let them know. And there were some really disappointed kids. In addition, just this whole stadium, we've seen football games over and over again as, the stadium was being completed, that they could be held there. Well, we finally did hear that the reason that that soccer game was not held there was because that day there was some painting that had to be done. Well, it would have been nice if somebody communicated that. It would have been nice if there was better planning so that either the painting wasn't done then or the game was changed. So, my point is that this is a field, an athletic facility that is definitely not just a football field. It is for boys, it is for girls, it is for, many different sports, and I don't even want to start listing them all because I'm going to leave something out. But I want to make sure as time goes by that there's not preferential treatment to any particular sports and that everybody is given the opportunity, both within FDR High School as well as from other schools within our community, to use that stadium. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kathy Craven here about the swim team. Lynn, I want to follow up with what Lynn was saying. I'd like to thank the board and the district administration for responding to some of our busing needs. However, there is one issue remaining. We do not have clarification on busing to and from meets. There was no information in the email from Dr. McCardle. Will the buses leave from FDR after school and go directly to Marlboro for home meets? Or in the case of away meets, will they be bused directly to that location? Any away meets, will the bus wait until the end of the meet to take the swimmers back to FDR or to Marlboro? If not, will there be a bus going to Marlboro for all meets? And will Marlboro then bus the swimmers to and from all away meets? Since the meets are only a few weeks away, we feel that this matter should be resolved as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to?
Hey, everybody. Cora, thanks for the talk about the Common Core, and my question isn't so much about Common Core as it is about, the implementation and the gap that is being implied. Commissioner King, we knew that the scores were going to be low. When they first came in, it was the first year for the grades, and that was the talk everywhere, not just here. But after listening to Commissioner King speak, he's implying that these standards have, and I don't know the lingo. I don't know, I don't know any of that. That it was all really put in place in 2010, so 3 years ago. And the way he was talking, it was like, well, we've been planning for this for 3 years, so, we should have been ready for this, coming up. We didn't start this test the first year that we were given this material. And what he implied is that, we should have been ready. So that's not, of course, what I'm hearing from all the teachers that I know and, and all this stuff. So I don't understand that gap between that, because, the way I think about it is we should have been ready, right? If we were giving them 3 years ago, we should have been able, these kids that were moving up through the system, by the time they took those tests, the grades really shouldn't have been dropped that significantly, right? That would be ideal. That's the way things are supposed to be. So I don't know where it fell. Commissioner King is implying that it was us. He's kind of saying, well, the district.
Not just Hyde Park, the whole entire state, yeah.
Agreed. No, absolutely agreed. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but that's what he's implying. So I want some clarification because it's really difficult to get, to find out what was been going on here. So sure. Thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Egerle?
Doug Eglinton. I haven't addressed you for too long. Cora, I had one thought about your presentation. That's not the reason I'm here, but just hearing it tonight, if there's any way we can simplify measurement, did we improve students or not? That would be very beneficial if I were a board member. That's the first thing I'd ask. Okay. The budget, all right? I attended the last budget meeting, committee meeting, and was unable to stay at the board meeting following it to hear the report. But I want to point out a couple of things. And I speak as a representative of taxpayers who don't have a lot of income, who have problems with their retirement income, and who are, they're white-knuckled about some of this stuff. At the that budget committee meeting, one gentleman, very, very good, spoke up and said, the school district has to have a contingency fund. And just like each one of us in our lives, he said, we also have to have contingency funds. So if something happens that we don't expect, we can handle it. My point to you folks is that there's a lot of people in Hyde Park that don't have contingency funds. Why? Not because they wouldn't like them. They can't afford to have it. They're using all their money now. And I think you've got to try to consider that when you get onto the budget, okay? Unfortunately, I had my assessment in the town of Poughkeepsie decreased this year, went down. 2 out of 3 years it's gone down. What happened to my school tax bill? Compared to last year, it went up 11%. I understand why. I've been, I understand why that happens. But you've got to consider you've got a lot of people that's happening to. Okay? Another woman at that meeting said, if I had to handle an 11% increase, I don't know what I'd do. And she has 2 people in college, for example. So, and the other thing I would point out that I pointed out at that meeting, you allocated money to reserve funds, 2 different funds, I forget now which they were, but, and my comment is maybe you shouldn't have allocated as much to each of those funds as you did, and use some of that money to decrease the tax rate. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address? Mr. Hughes?
Good evening, Steve Hughes. Excuse me. I'm not sure if aspirational goal is an oxymoron or just redundant. Are you planning to put any kind of measurement in place to gauge how successful your efforts are? Or are you going to rely on the state's guidelines of 75 and 80 because the state has been so stellar in their success rate of consistency and doing what's right? I'm just wondering if you have any plans to measure career readiness and college readiness in a different manner. And speaking of that goal, I just wonder, how do you reconcile that with the fact that some students' college is not appropriate? They're still going to be successful and contributing members of society, but they're just not right for college, or actually college is just not right for them. And by making them college ready, aren't you taking away from their life path? Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board? May I have a motion to exit public participation?
So moved.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? We are now, would anybody like to comment? You wanna go
I'll
first?
offer a few comments or clarifications on the swim transportation. Part of the reason for not having the 100% answer yesterday is that we've been working on it to make sure that we have the transportation. We will have transportation to and from practices. Right now, we have a contracted out to get the students to practice. The only unknown is if we're going to use the contractor to bring them back or if we have our own drivers bringing them back. But what I do know is that we have transportation to and from practices. I thought I saw an email from Amy that explained that, so I'm not sure why it was still a question, because I thought I was copied on an email that she sent to parents saying that transportation would be provided to and from practice, but I can look into that. The transportation to the swim meets, we will transport, and I think we covered this in the last meeting, but again, you know, if we need to do more to communicate, I'll have Mr. Siafi get on that right away. We are going to transport the students to the meets. Home meets are at Marlboro. The away meets, there are 4 away meets, and all of them are en route, or the bus goes en route to the away meet. They literally go right in front of Marlboro, so we are going to go to Marlboro, and then the kids can ride to the meets together. The students on the dates of meets will return to Marlboro, and parents need to pick their kids up at Marlboro. The reason why we're not transporting the students all the way back from Marlboro to FDR is that typically meets run well into the evening. Practice, they're going to transport the kids to and from practice. They'll get back to school at 5:40-ish, maybe 6 o'clock. But meets run really late, and it is our practice that a coach stay with the students until the parents pick them up. Since the coach is at Marlboro, on the night of meets, parents will have to pick up their students at Marlboro. And again, most of the parents are at the meets, but they will have to go to Marlboro to pick up their children after a meet, whether it's a home or away. So I think that addresses the transportation questions. As to the equity of field, please, by no means should anybody think that football has a preference. I certainly understand it may have felt that way. We were down to the wire with weather to the point where even up until a week before that ribbon cutting ceremony, we weren't sure we were going to be able to get onto the field. There was an awful lot of jockeying around, and again, I'm not going to speak to the communication issue because I can look into that. We can always do a better job on that. But in no way is there any preference to football. But literally every day for the last, until everything was completed on that field, we had to jockey around all of our athletic events. So I just don't want anybody to have the impression that we just celebrated the opening of this facility and there's any bias to keep another athletic team off. That is not at all the truth. That field and that facility was not finished until well after the ribbon cutting ceremony. We had serious concerns about having athletic events where people had to cross over that track before it was finished. So we were constantly trying to figure out, how can we finish the track? How can we get the athletic events in? And where can we say we just can't have any events because we need to line the track because once the cold weather comes in. So it was a real down to the wire jockeying of what can we do, when can we do it, how can we do it. But it was in no means meant to disenfranchise any athletic group. We started using a facility before its completion, and we had to jockey things around. So, again, my apologies if the communication could be improved. We'll definitely work on that. But the last thing I would want is to say that, geez, we tried to do, some things and use a facility before it was really ready, and then take the hit that people now are already feeling that we're not embracing them. And so, my apologies if that's how it felt. It certainly wasn't the intention. You want to do the curriculum?
Okay, so not necessarily in order. In terms of assessing college and career readiness, I want to make sure we recognize that the intent is to prepare students for both college and career. And much of what the literature says about Common Core is that students who are not entering college but are entering what we traditionally have referred to as trade schools or other training programs still need to interact with and manage pretty complex text. I have never said that I know how to fix my own car, and if I look at that manual that says, here's how you do XYZ on my car, I have no idea. But especially now as cars have become much more computerized, it's a complex task, and there's complex text that goes with it. So within the Common Core, the emphasis is on both college and career readiness. In no way are we trying to exclude students as we talk about high standards. Some of the ways that we measure college and career readiness that are not connected to our Regents exams, for example, include the SATs, the PSATs, our students that take ACT exams, and 2 years ago we started administering the Duchess Compass exam. And all of those, in some different ways, give students, their parents, and teachers feedback on whether or not students are prepared to start taking college-level courses. And those are highly standardized, certainly, and much more consistent in their content and in the kinds of feedback that we get. So those are some of the things that we use. The addition of maps in grades 9 and 10 at the secondary level also give us a great deal of information because they speak very specifically to the kinds of texts that students are prepared to interact with. So when we see a student, we had a student, I believe, 6th grade, test at grade 16 in terms of their reading level. That's a pretty good indicator for us, at least in that one respect, that this is a very high-performing student and we need to do some work to challenge them. So between SATs and PSATs, the ACTs, the Compass assessment, and our MAPS data, we're feeling that there is a good amount of information that we can use that's separate and apart from the results of the Regents exams. In terms of the gap, you know, so often the devil is in the details and the truth lies somewhere in between, right? And I'm going to suggest that that's true here as well. So certainly 2 years ago on opening day, we had the good fortune, it felt like good fortune at the time, to have the commissioner do our opening address to our faculty. And to his credit, he engaged in a question and answer time with our teachers and our administrators and was very gracious in giving that time just to Hyde Park. And that was the year, so this is 2 school years ago, that the expectation from the state ed department was that each teacher in the district try 1 or 2 units over the course of the year that were aligned to the Common Core. So that was not a mandate or an issue of compliance, coming back to Steve's concern. It was a suggestion. And certainly at that point, most of us understood that the Common Core standards were not going away, but there was not yet a sense of mandate among the masses of teachers across the state and certainly in Hyde Park.
Nor were there any materials.
Nor were there yet the materials to support. And again, the standards are not the curriculum, but as we were beginning to dabble 2 years ago, it became very clear that the curriculum needed to be rewritten. That takes time. In Hyde Park, as is true in many districts, that's work that teachers do outside of the school day and for pay and on a voluntary basis. I will say that there have been occasions here when an entire curriculum has needed to be rewritten by an administrator because we didn't have that participation. But part of that gap was the message from state ed was give it a shot over the course of the year. It was not yet clear when the new assessments were going to be administered that would be aligned. So yes, we might have done a better job across the state saying the writing is on that wall. We better completely redo now and prepare for this change. But at the same time, I think that the message from state ed and the provision of supporting documents, professional development, and materials has certainly not moved at the same pace as the change in the tests themselves. I don't know if you want to add to that. Okay.
Anybody else? Wayne, you want to have any comment on the reserve funds?
Sure. We did have a good conversation at the budget input group meeting just a little while back. And the district is sensitive to those folks out there that don't have contingency funds. And, you know, each year we try to manage what we give back to the taxpayers with what we need to have in reserves so that we can balance that into the future. Some of the reserves that we've put together are just that, a plan for employee retirement system to give back over a 4 or 5 year period of time to the budget to offset increases. So a lot of those things are pointedly put together for just that reason. So I appreciate, you're bringing that up, and we are certainly, attuned to the fact that there's folks out there that really don't have the ability to, survive increases in taxes, and we're doing what we can to help that cause.
Okay, so if I can recap, some reserve funds are for unknown things that might come up. Others are for future needs. And I know that in the past 3 years, we have indeed given back a great deal of money from the reserve funds. So your point is well taken, Mr. Egerton. It is always a struggle to know what to keep back and what to give. But I believe, I'm confident in saying that this board has given back a great deal of money, both in tax relief and in paying off of debt, which also affects the budget. And yes, it was unfortunate about your tax increase. As you know, it would have been a great deal less had not the equalization rate changed, and you understand that. So I guess thank you for coming and keeping us aware that we always do have to keep thinking on those things. So thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay. We now have the draft budget parameters. As I read these are very similar to last year's, with only some minor changes. Does anybody have any comments on this? I think the changes that were made in this draft reflect what we need to do, and it seemed to work last year. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on this. I certainly think these are things that we have to take into account once we start doing the budget. So I don't know if you want anybody have a comment. We're certainly not voting on these. Does anybody want anything that's different?
That's right. That's last year's. 14, yeah.
Okay.
So we could refer to it, okay, gotcha. That's better.
Then I'd like to move this from draft to a plan, and I'd like to see it available on the website so that the community will be able to know.
Start a budget link on the
Yep.
website with
That's
your
usually where we start.
presentation, the budget
Okay.
parameters.
And
The next agenda for adoption.
I don't think it's required.
yeah, the next meeting, yeah.
Does it require board action?
Hmm?
Does it require board action to adopt them?
I'm not sure. I think we adopted them last year, though.
Next meeting.
Next meeting, you said.
So we can do it at next meeting. Okay.
Calendar.
Now we have the budget calendar. There again, other than changing the dates, this is pretty much the script that we've been following for the last 3 or 4 years. So does anybody see anything in it that doesn't seem reasonable to you? Because it's, again, pretty much what we did last year with the proper dates changed.
Is January 24
Oh, there was one, yeah, that's right.
preliminary budget
Yeah.
discussion or presentation?
Presentation.
Presentation.
At the same, I guess we're assuming that that's the same thing. Discussion, presentation. I don't know.
Well,
I suggest we change the language there to presentation.
Definitely will be a presentation.
it is presentation online,
On what date?
23rd, right?
January 24th.
Oh, you're looking at
last-
the.
looking at
That's
last
last year,
year's.
yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, on the 23rd, it's discussion on the updated calendar, so
To
I'd like to see
presentation.
that presentation.
Yeah. Okay. You have that, Darren?
I have that, I was asked to put it back to them. Yeah,
Oh, you have-
because Wayne, are we discussing, you're not presenting the budget at that meeting?
At the January 23rd, I'd probably have what we used to call rollover budget, which is the preliminary budget. I'd probably have like I'd have a presentation ready by then. That's what we did last year.
Okay, so I'm trying to pull it up here, see which calendar.
It was too far. You gotta go for the,
Oh, this one. Yep. So how does it read on there?
This,
Preliminary budget
discussion.
Okay.
right.
I just didn't want anybody to be confused that we're presenting the budget that night.
Yeah, yeah.
So I asked for the word discussion. It'll be listed under a presentation, but we're certainly not going to be presenting the budget that night. So I just didn't want any confusion. So it doesn't matter to me how it's worded as long as we're clear, but I wouldn't want to mislead the public.
I mean, I'd be happier with presentation myself.
That's fine,
you know,
yeah.
But
January 23rd.
23rd. I think preliminary
Preliminary covers it, yeah.
enough, yeah.
Okay.
But what we've typically done there is, all the things we know to that point.
Right.
Right.
What the outlook looks like at that point, that's all. And so.
Right. So it would be a preliminary snapshot of the budget?
Perfect.
Is that what you're,
I was the only one with a concern on this.
so let's leave presentation, that's fine, yeah, okay. Any other comments? All right, we'll put that also to our next meeting.
Doug, one question about the parameters. One of the things that we discussed in a prior meeting was the idea that we would keep track of changes to the budget over time, just so that we can understand the process, and if a question occurs later, we can say, oh, that change was made because of this.
Okay.
I can't recall whether we made that part of our goals. I don't
believe so.
Yeah, and I don't see it in this document. I don't even see an appropriate place to put it in this document, but I do know that in prior years, it is an important consideration.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how to express that, but I wanted to bring it up while we're talking about it.
I think you should have a regular, a table of just what came out, what went in, and a reason, you know. Yeah,
Sure.
we used to kind of do that.
Well,
I think they used to call it the ins and outs or something.
These-
You know, there used to be.
Wayne, these are going to be PDF, there'll be PDF documents, the presentation, you can certainly annotate PDF documents, you can have notes, you can attach notes on it.
Well, again, I don't
It's
want to be
nice to
too
con-
specific. I just
Yeah.
want
Right, it just needs to be done
Some
though,
sort of a
because-
history.
Right.
Okay,
to accompany
All right.
the process.
that sounds like a good idea.
I can explain that later. I know exactly what they're talking about, yeah.
Okay. Let's go to old business, 9.1. Can I have a motion to adopt board policies 4321, 4321.12, 5420, and 5420R, which is the regulation, and those are, if I can scroll down here. 4321 is programs for students with disabilities under the IDA and New York Education Law, Article 89. 4321.12, use of physical restraints, which we are changing the policy name on, and among other things. 5420 is the student health services, and 5420R is the student health services regulation. So can I have a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? No? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Can I have a motion for 92 and 9.2, delete board policies 5400 and 5450?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Just, you didn't give me a chance to read it, but these are two policies that were recommended for deletion because the information is contained in the SAVE document. That would be student welfare and student safety. So all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. And I have a motion for 10.1, approval of the consent agenda as noted in the agenda items.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Let me get down to... I have a motion for 11.1, approve and arrange special education placements as noted in the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'll just say that I reviewed the entire packet of 35 meetings and recommend their adoption as presented.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And I have a motion for 11.2, capital project change orders and allowance access authorizations
So moved.
as noted in the agenda. Do I
Second.
have a second? Is there any discussion?
Yes. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I guess hopefully Wayne can answer these for me. I'm looking at the change order sheets here from Elliot to you. At Haviland Middle School, we did the pipe installation, the abatement, and some other work there. Looking at both of these change orders from Ashland Mechanical, they look like they're one and the same, and the question is, why do we have two separate change orders there?
I believe that there was a change order initially because they found a certain amount of these, and then as they continued on, they found more. What happens as they're into these places, and Elliot, you can pipe in if you need to, they didn't think there was going to be as many, and then there wound up being more of these joists. In fact, I have it written down.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Elliot can...
He really knows the specifics on what it was, construction-wise, but that's
Yeah,
what...
the Ashley Mechanical change order was in reference to flexible air duct connections in the air handlers in the A-wing, specifically where we were doing the pipe work. These areas were in need of abatement, was affecting the way the units were running, and were going to be disturbed as part of the pipe project, so we opted to remove them in accordance with the project within the allowance. It was one of those things where if we didn't do it now, we would have put ceiling back over it and had to go back through it. It would have been a higher cost of construction later on.
I think typically also, once we do, and you can, pipe in on this, when we do find it, we have to kind of take care of it.
Oh, that's understood, but why wasn't that in the original bid?
It wasn't...
You must have reviewed the area before you...
They did review it beforehand. One of the reasons that it was brought up after the fact is because one of the specific areas was above a ceiling in a restroom,
Right.
and wasn't encountered until they said, oh, we have to go through the ceiling rather than through this small little hole to get to where we need to go, and in doing that, we're going to disturb the ductwork. The other part of this was that the containment was already up. And so if you, if you know about asbestos work, some of the largest expense is building that containment and decontainment areas to do the removal. So once they had everything up, the call was made to just get the work done while we were in the building.
So, and the other part I have about that is you have the abatement work going on, but it's through Ashley, but you don't note if there's a subcontractor. Ashley isn't an abatement company.
That is correct. They did do everything through a subcontractor.
Right. I think that some of that should be noted here. when
Okay,
you change
I will
it.
do that going forward. I apologize for the ambiguity.
The other one I have is Hudson Valley Electric on the big number for the for the extra steel for the sign.
I could speak to that for you,
Yeah.
Gary. What happened with that is it was designed for a different shape sign, and then once the bid went out for this, which was a difficult bid, first time it was a district bid. It was, I believe, it was 3 shorter poles, and we wound up going 2 really long poles, and then there was conversation with regards to where the delay of game clocks go, and there was a miscommunication somehow in the design that it was going to be on the sign itself, on the scoreboard itself, and it should have been a single. So they used the steel that would have gone for the initial design of the scoreboard for the delay of game clocks, and then had additional need for steel to bring that large sign or scoreboard that we had up.
There were concerns additionally about wind shear and engineering integrity on the larger sign once the sign was finalized post-bid.
So it turned out to be a larger and heavier sign.
Right.
Bigger, heavier, taller, and so it required a heavier gauge steel of different type of weld construction. But we were able to use the original steel, as Wayne noted, for the delay of game clocks, which are also suspended independently of the main structure.
But so it was a total of $42,000 though, right? In additional steel work, it looks like.
Yes, sir.
That's just the additional steel, not the cost of the sign, additional cost of the sign.
No, not, that was just for the steel, just for the truss work and the structure.
Okay.
Do a lot with 42 grand.
Yes.
That's why, it's just as a general point, having to watch this stuff so carefully at the design stage because, they got you over the barrel once you start the construction. I mean, $42,000 for steel work. I mean,
Right,
Yeah.
it's stuck right out to me
Right.
too.
yeah.
Does a district have a particular number for change orders that it has to be approved by the board?
We do generally all of them. Bring 'em
All
through.
of them? And you don't have a
Right.
certain number that, unless it's an emergency need or something, then you can go through it and,
I believe anything under $10,000 he can do, but we bring them all to the
Okay.
board so that you understand all the things that are happening.
Yeah, we haven't had anyone with these projects that haven't been presented.
Yeah, but I think, I know I'd like to see this stuff probably before we end up having to, this work's already done and, so, all right. Let's see now. Yeah, and it just going on. The other thing too, in general, we had the additional soffit installation and exposed pipes at Haviland. So it's like another $5,200 because they had to, build a little box to hide the pipe. I don't want to say how does this get missed, but more importantly, who's checking to make sure that, on the walkthrough originally, so that there's no, we don't get these surprises, I can't believe they didn't know unless because of something that went on and there was a last minute route through that classroom that wasn't expected, then I would understand it, but.
I can speak to that, Kevin, if you'd like. That's in the classroom at the end of the run of the pipes in Haviland. And the reason for it is because in every other section of the building, the pipes are run along the walls.
Okay.
In this specific room, because of where the pipes have to go through the floor, they actually come through the center of the room and drop at the back wall of the room. And we're the ones on behalf of the district that asked for that as a safety item.
Sure.
The pipe construction is not welded, but coupled.
Okay.
And the fear was that a rambunctious teenager may
Yeah.
be inclined to
Okay.
jump up and grab it.
Yeah.
And
so you just
so
wanted to box it in to hide it.
we wanted to
basically.
box it in to keep anybody from hanging on it, hurting themselves. It's high pressure steam going
Right,
through that
yeah,
pipe,
yeah,
and we don't want
no.
anybody getting hurt.
All right, no, that makes sense. And then we talked about can then just get a little bit of a story on what went on with the actually that wasn't that much money in the big scheme of things. Just the lighting in the lobby at North Park.
The North Park lobby lighting was originally spec'd for a comprehensive array of 2-foot by 2-foot fixtures. When it came time to get to the end of the project at school opening, the fixtures were delayed and were behind production. So the option was try to make our old lights fit or opt for a different design with a fixture that was a little bit more expensive, but the purpose was to get them in place and installed before school opening.
Okay.
shouldn't that have been through the electrical prime though? Or was it originally, the original lights through the Hudson Valley Electric?
No, Hudson Valley Electric had nothing to do with this. Is North Park ceiling project.
Right.
The Hudson Valley Electric was just at FDR High School. Two different projects.
Well, still had an electrical prime at that building, right?
Actually, the electrical work was subbed out through Key Interiors. Key Interiors was the only contractor on that job.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Can I have a motion for 11.3, increase general fund, as noted in the agenda items?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion?
Yeah, just, we discussed this at a previous meeting, I think when we had one of those big whereas resolutions on this.
Correct.
Same thing, and I had stated my objection to it just because I have a philosophical problem with increasing or what we're spending in the general fund without voter approval. So I'm still going to vote no on this. I'm not opposed to the project. I know it needs to be done, but I just kind of wish we had accounted for it earlier so that it could have been part of the general budget, so.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Can I have a motion for 11.4, first reading of policies 4773, 5153, 6130, 6650, 6680, 6900, 7365, 7365 exhibit, as noted in the agenda item.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Although, any discussion?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Well, actually, more of a comment on the disposal of district property. I was reading through it the other day, and it just reminds me. This is a statement. It's it's a reminder for everybody that works for the school district. I recognize that as a taxpayer, that when we buy something that we all have to recognize that at a certain point it's not worth anything, and I know we got rid of a lot of these, but I'll just use an example, an old CRT, screen. Nobody uses those anymore. Nobody wants them. I would encourage, everyone that runs a building and the rest of the school, while it's important to obviously try to get some money back for some of the stuff, some of it's just junk, and we shouldn't kill ourselves thinking that we have to get money for everything so junk piles up. Because I've been in some of the basements of these buildings, and it's get a couple of 30 or 50-yard dumpsters and start shoveling these places out. It is just ridiculous the amount of junk we keep in this place.
You should go on a tour again. We've done some.
So I mean, I encourage you to do that frequently. And clearly, when you have something that actually is got some useful life left to it and can be sold, then we should be doing that. But I mean, I think there was always this notion that, well, the taxpayers bought it, we got to get money for it. You know what? At some point, something is not worth anything, and it becomes a hazard when you keep it around. And and I recognize you have the law to comply with, but there was just some stuff that we had around forever that was just taking up space, was really a fire hazard, and there's just no need to keep stuff like that. So that was just my comment on
I
that.
think a lot of those things, if they're on inventory, then it's our obligation to the procedure, but if it's not an inventory, which most of that stuff probably isn't, right?
Yeah.
You can just,
Under $2,000 is not.
right, so it's,
Give it the heave-ho. The other thing on students, I just wanted to maybe have a little quick discussion on let's see now, student assignments to schools and classes policy. Let me just open that up. My quick note I wrote on here was discussion of out-of-attendance zone placement. So I just want to refresh my memory of what I wanted to ask here. Let's see here. I just want to have some discussion on, and of course I'm sure this was done at the policy committee, but for the benefit of all of us, to understand, for example, let's see, request for student placement. This looks like new language. Parents, request for student placement in schools and outside their attendance zones must be made in writing and addressed to the Assistant Superintendent for Instruction and Personnel. Any requests that are approved will be for one academic school year only. And I think I kind of know maybe why that would be done, but I want to make sure we have clarification, because, unfortunately, when you start putting stuff in policies, all of a sudden, everybody thinks they've got a right to everything, and then, now all of a sudden it's the 1 year's not enough, it should be 2, or everybody that writes in thinks they should have the right to, go out of attendance zone. So I just kind of wanted to get the thought process behind why we would even allow it. And I think in some cases it makes sense. The example of the family that's moving across town into another elementary zone and the kid's got 1 year left. Really, do you want to change schools for 1 year? I get that, but I mean, that might be a scenario that makes sense to me, but does anybody want to kind of comment on that or have any thoughts on it as a general principle or rule?
The practice of the district has been exactly what we have in this policy as written. Cora was with us when we discussed this policy, and let's just say there were really only extraordinary instances where that was done, and it was done for generally good reasons, one of which is the example you just gave.
Okay.
I can't think of what the other one, there was.
Seniors.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
seniors, you're right.
Right.
So,
Okay. Yeah, just as long as, it just doesn't just, as long as, you're okay or that, it was considered that, we don't, crack the door open to, every
Right.
scenario under the sun, because this is
It-
always a hot topic.
it has worked.
You don't get through a school board member term without at least one of these frantic phone calls of somebody thinking that they want their kid here and why can't they, and, so, okay. All right, I'm good. That was all I had.
All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried, thank you very much. I have a motion for 11.5 to
So-
adopt the amended calendar as listed the agenda item.
So moved?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, what changed?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't very clear,
That
so.
was a state ed thing. Oh, surprise.
Do we know what the dates or what's?
Uh-oh, bad information.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hold up copies side by side,
Yeah.
so
No.
this kind of
I
things
can
like,
speak to it.
little quick memo saying, hey, this is what changed, would make it easy.
The change is around state testing and the process of scoring them. So in the past, there's been regional scoring where most of the districts in the county participate by having teachers go to BOCES, and it takes several days. Teachers are out of the classroom at BOCES scoring tests. So there's been conversation over the last several years about trying to identify one day where all of 3-8 ELA would be scored at the same time on the same day without students in session so that
for
there
the
aren't
whole county.
subs. Yes.
Okay,
Yep, so that's.
and what's
that's
the date?
plan.
Which one was that one we were looking
It's
at?
the April day that was added as a superintendent's conference day. I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, the 22nd, okay.
Yes, April
Okay.
22nd.
Okay,
So it's a no-school day for students. Teachers will be scoring assessments, and those not involved in the assessments will have other kinds of training,
okay,
probably having to do with that Common Core thing.
okay.
Any other questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. May I have a motion for 11.6, certify lead evaluators? That would be Joanna Murphy and Lou Ciaffi, as noted in the agenda item.
So moved?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Can I have a motion for 11.7, volunteer coaches, as listed in the agenda item?
So moved?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Yes. I was busy on the train yesterday coming up from Washington.
I'm glad somebody enjoys being on the train, then.
I got a lot of work done. Just a couple of thoughts on, or just a quick question. Number of folks on here, I know Sean Grigatti is, I believe he's a teacher in the district, right? Is he a phys ed teacher?
He is now.
Right, so there's no issue with him. We know we've got a background check on him, but what about anybody that doesn't teach with us or work with us? Are the background checks done? And the reason why I bring this up, there was a fiasco with a volunteer coach that wasn't appointed by the board up in Kingston
Yes.
last year, I think for crew, and I think this young man thought it was a nice idea that he would date a few of the young female students. And it was, I mean, it was a nightmare. There was arrest, and I mean, just, it was a mess. And the school district went, ooh, we don't know anything about it. So, I mean, it's nice that we have this process formalized, but what rigor do we put these folks through to make sure that, you know, like, we wouldn't hire an employee without the background check? And I don't have a problem with us paying for it, because, you know, that's the right thing to do if they're giving their time, but we probably ought to know that they're all the way they should be.
I can check on the background
Okay.
check piece of it. This is, the entire reason for this being here is what happened in Kingston, to formalize the process so that there is a vetting of who's there. I do know that everybody on the list is a certified
Right,
coach.
Right.
That we are, you know, so that they've gone through the certification process. I'll check on what other vetting, but they're not being paid, but they are all certified coaches, which is another distinction between just having some,
No, absolutely.
you know, kid who
Right,
just
right.
graduated. But I will check on the, I'm pretty sure they're,
I think if not, we probably should see that
yeah,
that's
they are all
done.
fingerprinted,
Okay, good. All
and,
right.
yeah, and I can get more information, but this was precisely for that reason.
Yeah, and that's
yeah.
just, I just want to make sure that that was done. You know, obviously, like I said, with Sean, the first one up, we don't have to worry about him. He's teaching in the district, so we know that's
Yeah.
already been taken care of, but,
And a number of these
okay.
are real knowns to us,
Okay.
so, but yes, there is a process and fingerprinting and certification and, but.
and then because they're giving their time, I don't have a problem with us paying for that. We probably should pick up that tab.
Well, we have to be careful.
Well, let's think about it, though. We have a policy where for lower paid employees that we pick up the tab, I believe, substitute teachers and the like. That they don't pay for their background check. You can take a look. I think we, you know, yeah, you might want to check that out, because we had made that, you know, decision a long time ago that, geez, these people don't make a lot of money. Now they got to go run out and, you know, and I certainly wouldn't object in this case that they're volunteers,
Well,
that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's a
guess
one-time
it's,
charge. Once their
Yeah.
fingerprints are in, we're good to go. But I think I remember we had that way back when, don't we?
but these people could be very, any one of these person could be, you know, a CEO of a company that wants to volunteer their time, so they're not necessarily, you know, I'm not saying there's any CEOs on here volunteering,
say,
but, you know, some of these are already our employees. I know Amy and I had that conversation, and I'll have to get back to you on it. We were looking at that where student teaching, you know, we don't pay for their licenses or their application for their teaching certificate.
That's
and-
different, because that's part of becoming, you know, that's no
Part of-
different than paying for their college courses. It's part of their curriculum.
I can look into it, and if we're going to do it, we'd have to budget for it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think you'd have a lot doing it. And it's
So
a one-time fee,
paying
because
for
once they have the background check, they're
just
good
the
for.
fingerprinting?
Yeah, right,
Okay.
exactly. That's what I was talking about,
Yeah.
right, the fingerprinting.
Okay, I thought you were talking about their coaches'
No,
certification.
no.
I was like, okay, this
no,
can start to
no,
rack up
because
a
they
lot
could
of
go
money.
off and get money, get paid someplace else, and I'm
Right.
not picking up that tab.
Okay, so the fingerprinting.
Yeah, the
I'll look
fingerprinting,
into
because
that.
I think we have always done that with, like, you know, I think we've decided with lower paid employees or occasional employees that, you know, that was a lot to ask of somebody that may not make a lot of money. And in this case, these folks aren't making any money that, you know, if it's already done, it's done, obviously, but I just, so, I thought it would be a
look
nice
into it.
gesture, if,
Yeah.
you know, going forward. Okay.
Okay, but this, excuse me, this is to, you know, legitimize the fact that they are volunteer coaches in our district. So,
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
all those in favor of this? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Excuse me. May I have a motion for 11.8, SEQRA Type 2 action and contract award for technology upgrade?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you.
See, I told you I wasn't opposed to the project. You guys already decided to do it, so okay, I'll
Right.
vote for that.
May I have a motion for 12.1 to re-enter public participation?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? At this point, if anybody would like to address the board, please step to the mic.
My name is Edward Craven. I'm the parent of an FDR swimmer. I also would like to thank the board and the administration for responding so quickly to our needs for transportation for the swimmers. That was really makes a huge difference. I really don't think they would have had a season without that. We did get, Lynn's not here, we did get a letter from Dr. McCardle saying that there would be transportation to and from practice. What we were in the dark about was the meet transportation. Until tonight, we didn't know that. So that's actually good news, very good news. There is a couple of other questions. One is, we were at the team meeting last night, and Coach LeDuc said that their policy is that the kids have to be signed out, and only a parent or a guardian can sign the kid out. I'm not really sure if that meant after the kids get back to Marlboro, but if that is the case, we're going to be doing a lot of carpooling. Not everybody's going to be able to get there, so we'd like to clarify that is that the case or not. It wasn't the case with us in Roosevelt last year. When the bus got back to the high school, everybody just took off. So I don't really know. We're not clear about that. The other two questions I have are, if the buses are going to drive take the kids to the meets, are they leaving after school? After the 2:15, that's the one. And the third question was, on Friday the 3rd of January, we're in the middle of a break, winter recess. There is a meet at home, so we're not clear on whether there's going to be bus transportation to Marlboro or not on that one. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody else like to address the board?
I do have a question about these, the volunteer coaches. If we can have volunteer coaches to help out with these, why aren't we allowed to approve volunteers to help with some of the, I don't know what they're called, some of the clubs that have been cut from the budget? We've got the ski club, and I don't know, we have a couple of things that were cut, and we're told that we couldn't even continue them even if we had volunteers willing to kind of bring them on. So my question is, why can we have volunteer coaches and not have parents volunteer to continue some of these extra clubs that some of the kids were doing?
Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Can I have a motion? Oh, we got somebody else. Well, yeah.
I'm sorry. This is quick.
And can
all
I
the
ask-
discussion.
Can I ask before you say it?
Yes.
Where'd you come up with that?
One of my best
Beautici-
friends made this for me, and I told her I would wear it today.
Okay, you got guts. Sorry.
Gold, we got to bleed green and gold. We were discussing the Haviland thing, and I didn't know. I know my son is only in 7th grade, but a lot of his classes are in the 8th grade wing. And a few days during that cold weather this week and last week, the temperatures were like in the 40s in some of his classrooms. And I was just wondering if that was taken care of. Thank you.
I'll wait this time. Anybody else? Can I have a motion to go out of public participation, please?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. Would anybody like to comment? I'll take a shot at the volunteers, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
I think,
Hope you get it right.
these particular, these particular volunteers are for already existing teams, and in addition to
paid coaches,
the
right.
paid coaches. How'd I do?
Very good.
Okay, good, thank you. The difference between that and establishing a new or reestablishing another team without, with our club, yeah. And, okay, that's all I can comment on.
I don't quite follow that logic.
One
I don't mean to
com-
disagree with you, I just don't understand it.
Well, I'll make one comment. Since it's a club, there are no prescribed certifications required for the leader of that group, as opposed to when you have a teacher identified as the club advisor. In In other words, the assistant coaches are required to take the certification to be certified as a coach, which means they have like 5 courses they gotta take on various aspects of coaching and that, and also they must maintain a current first aid certification. But they work under the direction of a coach who has also been certified by the district and is being paid. If we're talking about bringing volunteers in to run clubs, we've had problems in the past where there have been members that have worked as parent volunteers on a trip, ski trips and other trips like that, who were unaware of school policies, and we ran into problems with that when something occurred on the trip that required some, this has been a while, it's actually been changed since then to make sure that everybody that's working as an assistant on a trip, like the ski club or any of the other organization groups, those parents that are working as volunteers and assistants were required to attend a meeting and get clarification on all the school policies so they were aware of what would happen. Particularly like with a ski club, sometimes the kids get sick on a trip, they don't go home. What happens is most of the kids then leave the confines of their accommodations to go onto the mountain and ski and stuff like that, but there may be 1 or 2 students left on site. And sometimes they're sick enough not to be able to go skiing, but unfortunately they weren't sick enough not to get into some mischief. And the problem was the person that volunteered to stay with them wasn't aware of what to be done, and there were delays in doing the proper things, and some things were done improperly, and it created some issues. So that would be an issue of creating a volunteer to run the club, and the lack of controls because it wasn't a paid district employee, which goes away to an extent when they're working under the direction of somebody else.
Yeah, I'll just add one other point of clarification, and there's some labor agreement rules where if it is a school-sponsored activity, the school needs to fund it. So if we decided we wanted to offer a pottery class, we can't have a volunteer. I mean, that's a certification issue, but you can't have the school saying that it's a school club if the school doesn't fund it. I mean, it could be a private club. For example, I'm a club advisor. I'm the advisor for the FDR Interact Club. It is not a school-based club. It's a community-based club. So I fill out a building use form every time I want to meet with them. They don't get their picture in the yearbook because they're not a school club. It's the same as me being a Girl Scout leader and then filling out a building use form to use the facility. So as much as we always want to have volunteers, if we determine that we can't financially support a certain activity, that means the whole thing, the transportation, the facility, the advisor, and so it's just another piece to the puzzle.
I'm just going to say, that's not to say you couldn't form a club. My daughter played on a volleyball club that had nothing to do with Hyde Park, but it cost a lot of money to...
Yeah,
I know that.
I know ski clubs that do form in the private citizens, and they charter their own buses, and a lot of times the pickup point is the school, but it's completely a private club, so, yeah. The signing the students out, I did speak to our interim athletic director, Lou Ciaffi, after the meeting last night. He only brought one question to me about a particular child signing out with another set of parents, but I'm going to need more clarification about the signing out process.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know our policy is on an away event. You know, if, you're there to see the game or match or meet, and you're there with your kid, and you're like, I'm not going to have him ride the bus home, sign him out and take them with you. But that's obviously not the policy at a home event, or even when you arrive home from an away meet at the high school. Like Mr. Craven said, that, the kids just go into the parking lot and hopefully get picked up by the right people, and, obviously, the coach makes sure that everybody's gone and not loitering around, but that they're all out of there, but there's no formal process. So I think maybe we need a clarification from Marlboro. Are you talking about signing them out at Marlboro High School, or are you talking about on an away meet, like you're there to see your son or daughter swim, no, it'd be your son, your son swim in Minnesink, and you're like, no, why don't I have him schlep on the bus home? He'll come home with me, sign him out, and off you go. And that may be what he was referring to, but I guess you probably need that clarification from him, what their policy is, because that's how we would do it, but,
Right. And I will check on the meet on January 3rd. I don't know why that would be any different from any other athletic meet that occurs when school is not in session. What I do know is, on Saturday practices, we don't transport, but I just don't want to say the wrong answer, but if it's an official meet, it will be on the schedule for transportation. But I'll double check.
Yeah, I think we were just responding to the thing that it said, if there was no school, there'd be no transportation. One of the things we talked about is no service.
Okay.
Well, that referred specifically to practices, yeah,
Yeah.
to clarify that, yeah.
Yeah, because we always offer transportation when there's a game and there's no school. There's games over Christmas break or whatever, so, yeah.
All right, any other comments? We'll move on to 13.1, Board Subcommittee Reports. Do we have any committee reports to anybody at the big meeting, or?
We do.
Yeah, we did.
It's not a subcommittee, but the meeting had.
We had a budget input group meeting. The date was 2 weeks ago now, on a Monday, and we discussed some of the recent presentations, specifically the fund balance and reserves. We reviewed the Affordable Health Care Act and some other things like the CPI, all the hot topics that are going on right now with regards to the budget. And so it was a good meeting, well attended, and we appreciate folks coming into that. We always welcome new members to come on board.
Okay. Move on to 13.2, upcoming meetings and events. Tuesday, November 12th is the Policy Subcommittee, 3:30 here in the Administration Office. Wednesday, November 13th is the Energy Committee meeting, 4:30 here at the Administration Office, and the big group also will meet at 6 p.m. also here at the Administration Office. On Thursday, November 14th, District Leadership Team, the DLT, will meet here at 6 p.m. Monday, November 18th, Technology Subcommittee, 2:30 here at the District Office. Tuesday, November 19th, the Audit Committee will meet at 4:45.
Yeah, that, just to let you know, that just became a problem for me, because I have and it's fine if it has to go on, but I may not be there. I had my meeting that I was going to have to run out of here for, got moved back an hour, so I have to be in Rhinebeck at 5 o'clock, so.
All right, we'll make sure that we have a quorum.
The private jet is not available?
Yeah.
Okay. And, well, there's no November 26th and November 28th on here
No.
for Dan and I.
Ah, yeah.
That should be an event, right? It's our birthday.
We can make it one even if it's just between you and I.
Okay, all right. Thursday, December 12th is the next Board of Education meeting, 7 p.m. here at the district office.
Oh, a whole month and a week away? I don't know if I can be able to.
Yeah. Don't get used to it. Don't get used to it. Budget's
That's why
it's
we
coming.
take it when we can.
We have no reason to go to executive session. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you very much. We're now adjourned.